Hello, I'm Frances Deegan Horowitz, President of the City University Graduate Center. Welcome to Women, a series of programs for and about us. In 1915, 100 women, still unable to vote, founded an organization to discuss local issues and initiate political action. Now, as it begins its 90th year, the work and goals of the Women's City Club of New York are perhaps as urgent and certainly broader in scope. Its president, Blanche Lawton, has had a distinguished career, or I should say careers, as she's moved among the corporate, academic, and nonprofit worlds. Welcome.
Pleasure to be here.
It's good to have you here.
Thank you.
Your family came from Jamaica.
Yes, they did.
But you were born here.
I was born here.
But then you went back at an early age. Why?
I think my family preferred to raise their children in Jamaica. So I went there. I didn't go. I was taken there when I was 3 years old. And we lived there for about, I'd say, 8 or 9 years. And then they decided to come back to New York for whatever reason. And I went through the school system here. And as soon as I finished college, I went back to Jamaica because I somehow preferred it there, preferred the lifestyle. I was more comfortable there. I preferred the openness of Jamaica. So as soon as I graduated from Brooklyn College...
Yes, you're a CUNY graduate.
I am a CUNY graduate, a proud CUNY graduate. I went back to Jamaica for about another 8 or 9 years.
And you got involved with sports.
Not initially, but eventually. Initially, I got involved, well, a little bit of a background. I am a dual national. And as an American citizen born and as a British subject at the time, I was not allowed by the American government to work for the government of my other citizenship. The words were, "We will pick up your passport if you should do this." So I had to wait it out and get a position in social work in a non-government agency. And the agency that I became affiliated with was an organization that provided vocational and recreational opportunities for underprivileged youth. So we established these various clubs throughout the island and recruited volunteers to run the clubs and to train the young people. And after a number of years of that, I was offered a position with the Ministry of Welfare and Development, I think it was. Jamaica had been selected as a site for the Caribbean and Central American Olympics. So it was a new venture, and I was offered a position there, and I was a little bit tired of traveling. I thought this would keep me based in one place, so I said, yes, I will do it. Absolutely ignorant of what it meant, but nonetheless I did. And that's how I got involved with it.
And then you came back to the States.
Then I came back. After a while, an island is an island, and the shores begin to close in on you. At least that's the sense I had. And I became involved at Barnard College strictly by accident, and stayed there for, I think, 13 years in the whole area of student activities. And after 13 years at Barnard College and through the very exciting years of the 60s, and I kept hearing from friends of mine, well, you know, there's a real world out there. When are you going to experience the real world? And after the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, things were really calm on campus, and rather than that student contact and interaction, it was becoming pretty much a business operation for me. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be in business, I might as well be in business. So I became involved in the corporate sector.
And that was with MetLife?
With MetLife.
And what did you do there?
Well, I was in corporate philanthropy, so it was not really insurance per se. We were this little island, as it were. We had a quite extensive philanthropic program that included the MetLife Foundation, corporate contributions, the employee volunteer program, corporate social responsibility, and a host of other activities that were not product related, but were, as I said, philanthropic.
And was it through that work that you got involved with the Women's City
Yes,
Club?
it was. Yes, it was. We made a conscious decision that we should reach out to certain organizations to have ourselves positioned certainly well with them, and Women's City Club was one of them. So I went over to attend a meeting one day and ran into an old colleague of mine who had been I think, director of alumni affairs at Barnard, and she said, well, welcome, you have to join. So I said, why not? And that was, I believe, 1984. And I didn't become personally active with Women's City Club. We supported them in all sorts of pro bono ways. And then after I retired from MetLife, I had nothing but time on my hands, and I was encouraged to go back and become personally active.
Which you become so personally active,
Yes.
you're now the president.
Yes, yes.
Which is, I think, a full-time volunteer job.
It is a full-time volunteer job, yes. Yes, it is.
Why a Women's City Club? I mean, when it was formed, as I said earlier, women didn't have the vote, the women's voice. There is a, quote, regular city club that has both men and women. Why the Women's City Club?
Well, first, I would want to explain that we don't deal solely with women's issues, and I think that's the sense that a lot of people have. Our concerns are issues that affect New York City. So if you look at our programs historically, it's not limited to, by any means, women's issues. I think it's Women's City Club because it was formed by women.
And by very illustrious women.
Very illustrious women.
Eleanor Roosevelt was a member?
Oh, yes. Eleanor Roosevelt, Frances Perkins.
Ida Tarbell?
Ida Tarbell, a host of them. And as a matter of fact, I took the brochure that we prepared for the 60th anniversary of the club up to the history department of Barnard the other day. And this professor looked through the board members and read down the names, and she said, gracious goodness, this is the New Deal right here, kind of thing. So they were women who were influential socially, financially, undoubtedly, and the feeling was and is that although it may not be a woman's issue, there's a woman's perspective on whatever the issue happens to be. I think there may also be a bit of, if you, in a situation where it's male and female, a joint activity, it's conceivable that the males might dominate, and we wanted to retain our own identity.
And how do you choose? I mean, I looked at all the issues you're working with: education, welfare reform, electronic voting, women's productive rights, principles of universal health care. How do you choose the issues?
Well, we have difficulty choosing, and because there are so many and they are so important. A first level of choice is women. 99.9% of our activities are conducted and carried through by our volunteers. So choice to some extent is determined by the expertise of the volunteers who we have and those who are willing to step forward and provide leadership on any one issue. That's one way of choosing. Also, we have to look at what is the issue at hand and what is the overall effect on the city primarily, on the state, and so the effect on the population as a whole. How does it affect the quality of life here?
Well, I mean, I know you've taken up such unglamorous issues as infrastructure.
Yes, infrastructure. Right now we're somewhat deeply into it. We certainly have a very strong position on the 2nd Avenue subway, and we advocated for that very strenuously.
But Women's City Club is nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan.
So what does advocacy mean in that context?
Advocacy in that context would mean doing a great deal of research. What are the implications of the issue on either side of it, and invariably producing reports, papers, presentations. We testify often in public places, the city council, whatever, and effort to inform and influence public opinion and decision makers.
Well, let's take the Second Avenue subway.
Mm-hmm.
That's a local issue. It's a state issue, and to the extent that federal funds are involved, it's a federal issue. So, and it gets mixed up in the politics. It gets mixed up in elections. How do you navigate all of that?
Very dexterously.
And I mean, are you in favor of the Second Avenue subway?
Yes, we are.
Okay.
Yes, we are in favor of the Second Avenue subway. But we have to do it carefully in a nonpartisan way, because we are a 501c3 organization, and where we can advocate through educational activities, we don't lobby. Second Avenue subway, we certainly studied it. We got some sense of the population that was involved, using the existing lines that were there, the hardships that people were experiencing, the pluses that it might mean if that whole corridor were opened up, and all those things, the economic development that might be a spin-off from having the subway. And we took a position that we were in favor of.
This is an issue that's been discussed for many years. When did the City Club get involved with it?
I'm going to say it's before my time. And I would say they got involved in it from the very inception, which might have been in the 60s. I think in the 60s.
Over 40 years, New York's been discussing the Second Avenue subway. Where are we now, and what kind of impact does advocacy from the Women's City Club have, do you think? Well,
first of all, it's a kind of thing where, as an organization of one voice, it is difficult to say that we would have any impact as one voice. One of the things that we try to do on a number of issues is to collaborate with other organizations. The feeling being the strength and the numerical count of the voices heard will have an impact on the decision makers.
How many members are there of the Women's City
We
Club?
have, in round figures, 500. So we have formed collaborative efforts with organizations on this particular issue, such as the Strap Hangers Association, NYPIRG, and so on.
And do groups seek you out for your joining in their advocacy?
Yes, yes.
And how do you choose?
We are often, well, if the position that they're espousing is consistent with our own, if their approach to the issue is consistent with our own, we will choose one way or the other. You know, there may be a group might have a style of advocating that would not be the style of the Women's City Club, would not be in keeping with how we want to present ourselves, and we would not choose to do so.
Well, you know, we're in the midst of election year, and one of the issues I see on the list is electronic voting. So take me through how you deal with that issue, where you came out on it, and what happens when you've got disagreements within your polity?
I'll answer the last part first. We have a very active board. It happens that we have a task force on the election procedures, and they do a great deal of research, one type of election versus another, electronic versus paper, whatever. The task force will report back to the board, giving the facts, and the board will make a decision on what side we want to come down Our sense about the elections is that we certainly need modernization of the system. We need an upgrade of the equipment and the machinery. We need an upgrade of the people who staff the polls and so on. So we look at all of those things. Yeah.
And come to, with respect to electronic voting, have you taken a position for or against electronic voting?
Our position on electronic voting is we have to be certain that all needs are met. We want to be certain that the voting options are available to various the population with various language requirements and so on. So we would be in favor of electronic voting if all these other things were met. Yeah.
And what about a paper trail?
We are concerned about a paper trail. There is talk, as you know, about there is a type of paper trail even with electronic voting. I'm not sure that that is so, but we are concerned about a paper trail, yes.
And when you come to controversial issues like women's reproductive health rights,
Mm-hmm.
Are all 500 members of a single voice on an issue like that?
I would say no, but again, it's a question of majority and going to the board with the pros and cons and having the board make a decision on that, what side we're going to support. We are pro-choice. We are not anti or pro a method, we are pro-choice.
And have you ever had members quit because they didn't agree with the board's decision?
It's entirely possible. I can't imagine over the years that people have not left the board for one reason or another. Yeah?
Well, you know, at the present time, everyone talks about how divided the country is,
Mm-hmm.
and you all take up really contentious issues.
Yes, we're contentious people.
And so do you find the national division on these issues represented in the Women's City Club?
I'm going to say to a lesser extent, because very often the national divisions are regional. And the Women's City Club is primarily an Eastern, if there's such a thing as an Eastern mentality as opposed to Midwest or Southwest or so on. So I can't say that it would be national versus what the club has to say. I think it would be more a form of the position on a national scale as opposed to the national position. Yeah.
But you said earlier that the focus is New York City, and yet a number of these issues really have resonance far beyond New York City.
Of course.
What's the position of the Women's City Club on universal health care?
We are strongly in favor of universal health care.
What does that mean?
A one-payer system. Fairly much translating universal health care would be essentially what we have now in Medicare, which is a one-payer, as it were. So we are in favor of that, and that it should be open to everyone. There should not be distinctions because of money or whatever have you. Yeah.
And in coming to that position, what kind of work did you do in terms of the economics of it? And
right. We have a very active health issues task force, and they work very closely and have worked and continue to work with a number of other organizations that have interests in the issue. They have studied things like the obvious, how many people are without health care for whatever reason, the significance of it, the question of, say, immigrants not having access to the health system because they're not familiar with it. the economic impact of it, and just in terms of equity for all, the decision was that we would go with universal health care.
And then what do you do with that position?
Well, we prepared a set of principles that we would hope, for example, in the current elections or any other elections, that we would view candidates in the light of whether or not they meet those principles, which essentially boil down to universal health care.
And so does that bring you perilously close to endorsement?
We wouldn't endorse any one candidate, no. We would just say, well, how close is this person or that person? Or if there are 4 points or 4 principles, we might say that this individual is consistent with our own principles on 1 point, 2 points, no points, but that is not necessarily endorsing them because there are other issues involved.
Right. So do candidates come to you to seek your support, or they know better?
I would say I don't recall any coming to us per se to seek support, so they probably know better kind of thing. You know, well, we might get a host of flyers from all candidates of all stripes, and we don't support any one person. We may have in a guest speaker who might be a politician, but not at the time that they are campaigning, and when they have announced that they are actively campaigning, we would not invite in a single person, potential candidate or candidate to speak with us. If we couldn't invite all, we wouldn't invite one.
You've also been very involved with the issues of education reform and education financing, and
Yes.
particularly in New York, the Campaign for Fiscal Equity.
Yes.
Where was the Women's City Club in that whole set of issues?
Well, we signed on with a friend of the court in terms of financing, that the city schools were not getting their fair share of the funding, and that has gone back and forth a few
Right.
times. But we were definitely in favor of funding, increased funding, and parity for the city schools. We know that the argument is, well, if we undid it for the city schools, we would have to review the entire area. But our position is that the city schools are not getting their fair share of what is available or should be available to us, and we continue to press for that.
And how often do you go in as friend of a court on an issue?
Not often. For the years that I've been associated with Women's City Club, I can think of 2 and possibly 3 occasions, which isn't often given the spread of our work. You know, we could be friends forever, but I can only think of 2 and possibly 3.
And how do you know whether you're making an impact?
In general, it's one of those things that you never know. It's difficult to measure. It's certainly a time element over a period of time. We will see if the position that we advocated has come to pass or not. And if it does come to pass, we like to take some credit that it's because of our activities that a certain measure passed. You know. But of course, it would have been the effort of a host of other organizations.
So what's on the agenda?
What's on the agenda? Well, on the agenda is our 90th anniversary, really 90th anniversary year. We intend to celebrate throughout the entire year. We have a 90th anniversary committee. We have selected the theme, revitalizing citizen participation for the 21st century. The sense being, given our origins, we began with citizen participation, and over those years, not just in the club, but certainly across the country, citizen participation has eroded for a number of reasons.
Right.
And we want to look at it to see why, what are the various influences on that, and what we as an organization can do to revive that.
Well, one can only wish you much success.
Why, thank you.
And a happy birthday
to
the City Club.
Yes, thank you so much.
I'm sorry that we're out of time. My thanks to Blanche Lawton, President of the Women's City Club of New York, for joining us. For the City University Graduate Center and Women to Women, I'm Frances Deegan Horowitz.